Yes, guys, welcome back to another draft video. In this one, we're going to be talking all things Draft Combine. It took place over the weekend. From Friday, it was down at the AIA Centre, Collingwood's training ground, and then it moved to Sunday for kind of the indoor stuff, you know, your 20-metre sprint, your vertical jumps. It was down at the Melbourne Sports and Aquatic Centre. So I went down, I checked it all out. It was my first time that I've ever actually attended a Draft Combine, so it was really interesting to see how it all worked. I did actually plan initially to do this video on the Sunday night, yesterday night when I came back from the event, but given how it sort of worked, like you had different players going to different stations and they were all sort of, doing the actual activities at the same time as each other. You had a big kind of scoreboard over, like a digital scoreboard with the 20-metre sprint times coming up. So I caught most of those, but a lot of the vertical jumping and the agility test and those kind of ones, I didn't actually get all the numbers. So I waited until today, until the top 10s come out, so we could kind of look into all of the results just a little bit more deeply and sort of analyze things a bit better. So I guess there's still that question of like, does the combine actually matter? I think for the real top end of the draft, the top 10, it probably doesn't matter that much unless there's some absolutely outstanding performances. I think where it does come into contention is the back end of the draft, maybe some player that was pretty speculative, wasn't really in contention, and then they have an amazing combine that sort of rockets them up the draft board. I think that can happen. And what I really like about it is just looking at the athlete from an athlete profile side of things. I'll actually be doing a podcast in the next couple of weeks with Jay Edmonds, who works with AFL athletes on getting their speed and getting their endurance better and their whole athletic profile better. What I like is just the mix of players that you might be bringing into your club and their athletic profiles, whether it be a speed-based profile, an endurance-based profile, or a hybrid profile where you can run long distances and have that quick, explosive pace as well. And then kind of, if you're building a midfield, you're building a forward line, you want sort of different athletic profiles within that. So I think it's important for that. And I think clubs kind of want that entire picture when they draft a player to sort of know what they're investing in overall in the draft. So how this video is going to work, I'm going to break it down into positions. So I'll do midfielders. I'm actually going to do midfielders like smaller bodied ones around that 180 mark, and then I'll do bigger bodied midfielders as well. And then I'll do sort of key position players and some of the more utility small forwards and those sorts of ones, and running defenders, those kind of ones as well. The players that didn't test, kind of the big names, are obviously Levi Ashcroft, Sam Lawler, Murphy Reed, Xavier Lindsay, Joe Berry, Cooper Hines, Sid Draper, Luke Trainer, Isaac Kako, and Jesse DeToley, just to name a few. So not everyone tested. We can't line them all up. I'll do a few comparisons and things for the ones that did test and kind of just talk us through it as we go. Like, it'll just be a pretty casual kind of a thing. Just for a little bit of context on what we're looking for here, if you're talking about a 2K time trial, a pretty good time, or like a high-end time for that, is going sub 6 minutes and 30 seconds. So if you're doing a sub 6:30, you're probably in the higher end of the endurance level. For a 20-meter sprint, if you're able to go sub 3 seconds, you're starting to get into that really high speed category. If you do both of those things, you're looking at that sort of hybrid category where you're really good at running long distances and that quick burst of pace as well. And then when we talk about the running vertical jumps, like, I'm not as worried about that as far as building that profile, but it does show that you're a little bit more elastic. So if you can do a standing vertical at like 75 centimeters plus, that's really good. For the agility, if you break 8 seconds, usually you're in really good company. And it's something like mid-90s for the running vertical jump as well, just for a bit of context, and we'll sort of go through that as we go along. So I'll kick things off here with the regular size midfielders, somewhere between that 175 and 185, your kind of general size midfielders. And I'll start this off with a comparison of two really high-end midfielders in this draft, just to kind of show you when we talk about those athletic profiles. The first one I want to bring up is finnO'Sullivan, who really showed us in this combine things that I've talked about through the year, but this probably just reiterated what a kind of hybrid athlete he is. And I want to put him up against Jagga Smith here. So I'll put the graphic up there showing both of some of their attributes across this combine. Now, finnO'Sullivan, he went 6 minutes 28 in the 2 kilometer time trial. And remember, I said 6 minutes and 30 seconds is kind of your cutoff there for being in that higher end. So he's at the upper end of that high end, but he's still in the high end of an endurance profile there. And then he's gone a 2.98 second 20-meter sprint, so showing that he has that speed and that explosiveness off the mark as well. So it really puts him into that genuine hybrid athlete, and probably most high-profile hybrid midfielder in this year's draft. Now, the agility test, he also went ballistic with an 8.15 second agility test, which was 8th overall, showing that sideways lateral movement that he has, and the running vertical where he ran second with a 93 centimeters, really putting together that triumvirate of being, having that elasticity, that explosiveness, and that powerful agility that he has. If we compare and contrast that to Jagga Smith, so Jagga being more of that sort of slow burn, so he edged finnO'Sullivan in the 2 kilometer time trial. He ran a 6:13 in that, but he wasn't able to crack the 3 second, albeit he's still a pretty quick runner, Jagga Smith, so he went 3:03, but he wasn't able to crack that, and then his agility test was somewhere outside the top 10. I don't actually have a number on that, and not a guy that would test well in the vertical jumping. He doesn't have that sort of elasticity in the athletic profile. So that's just putting two high-end midfielders that have very different profiles and are both really, really good in their own way. But it was really cool to see that up against each other in the draft combine. The other smaller midfielder that I want to talk about here is Leo Lombard. So he was probably that guy. If you look at the combine holistically, he was that guy that sort of won the combine, quote unquote. You kind of have one of those every year. I think last year it was Darcy Wilson who went absolutely crazy. Lombard is the most explosive mid, 100% in this draft, and he plays like that too. So the combine really does back up the eye test in a lot of ways. A 2.852 20-meter sprint. So just to put that into context, I said finnO'Sullivan's was really good at 2.98. He went 2.85. So just, doubling down on that again. He paired that with a 6:39 in the 2K time trial. So he's not breaking that barrier of sort of being a hybrid, but that's actually pretty close for Leo Lombard, close to the hybrid territory. But I certainly think he's more geared to that speed profile. He broke the agility record of 7.812. If you're going under 8 in that agility test, it's absolutely elite. I don't think anyone broke the 8-second mark in the last year's draft. So, he had a great combine. I spoke to him briefly after the testing, and he said he wasn't really happy with his 2 kilometer time trial, which he has done better in the past, but has put on a little bit of size throughout the year, which has probably dampened his 2K time trial. He was awesome throughout the weekend, and he had an awesome season. Now, remember, he's the Lark medalist. He's one that's probably forgotten because he's just going to Gold Coast, but a wonderful, wonderful player. And the other one that I want to talk about who's definitely a forgotten player, he's probably coming up to the combine. I think he's a genuine needle mover, this guy. I'm talking about Luke Urquhart. And he also fits into that similar to finnO'Sullivan profile, being a bit more hybrid. Now, he's not as elastic with the vertical jumping as, say, a finnO'Sullivan, but he put in a 2.97 20-meter sprint, which was pretty similar to Finn, and then he went 6:25 in the 2 kilometer time trial. So as far as the endurance and the speed, he and finnO'Sullivan share very similar qualities. Luke Urquhart was really good for Western Australia in the national championships. If you remember back, he won a lot of the football. Probably if you're looking at his whole football package, the bit of a knock on him is the kicking and just that disposal efficiency. So it's just how you kind of deploy him. But I think that Luke Urquhart might be one that really benefits from the combine and goes from maybe slipping out of draft contention to actually falling into that, top 50 or 60 players that are going to get eaten up there in the draft. So that's all the smaller midfielders that I wanted to talk about. So moving on, we'll jump into those bigger bodied midfielders. The first one on the list is Josh Smiley. I'm also going to kind of compare, I guess, a little bit with Harvey Langford and Bo Allen, probably the other two major notable big-bodied mids that are in this pile. I mean, kind of compare their different games. I know, like, of a weekend watching them play footy, you can tell they play a little bit differently, but we can see the combine results up against that as well. So Smiley's 20-meter sprint was a 3.08, so not bad, not amazing, obviously, not cracking that 3-second mark. His time trial, I don't have an exact number on, but as I understand from talking to people and just remembering on the day, it was around that 7-minute mark. So maybe a little bit underwhelming on that end. And then he pulled off a 7th place in the standing vertical. So a pretty good job from him there, kind of showing that height and reach that he has. Probably something that I've talked about a little bit in my videos with him when he goes forward, just not having that aerial presence. And he sort of obviously has it with that coming 7th in the standing vertical, but not something that he's majorly showed off in the game. I suppose he has showed it off a little bit at stoppages. Like, he does use that reach to, get the ball at its highest point and that sort of thing. But pretty nothing like majorly standing out there from his combine. We'll have a look at some of the other names here just to kind of compare against. So Harvey Langford, he was really good in the 2K time trial. Surprised me, actually. He went 6:24 in that, so breaking that 6-minute 30 marker. And I didn't say it off the top, but I will caveat the 2K time trials. They were all, I think for most players in the draft, they were a little bit slower. It was quite windy. It was quite humid on that Friday where they did them. So probably had some worse numbers than maybe other years. Harvey Langford's 20-metre sprint, which was always going to be the elephant in the room for Harvey Langford. He is a slower player. He went 3.24, so probably about what we expected, but not amazing for him. Again, I go back to Paddy Cripps. He ran a 3.2 in his draft year and a worse, beep test it was at the time, not a 2K time trial. So Langford definitely does have the endurance element to his game there. Certainly doesn't have the speed, but he does have those other weapons like the aerial ability. He didn't rank in the vertical jumping, but we know he's got that marking ability with his strength. He just doesn't really have that power and that explosiveness of some of the other midfielders. The last one I want to talk about does have that, which is Beau Allen, and that's why it's good to have these three different players here just to have a bit of a look at it. 7.94 seconds was his agility test, which was probably the real thing that stood out for him, but he did have some other eye-catching results, which was his 2.9 second 20-metre sprint and a 72 centimetre standing vertical, just to show that rounded athleticism. He didn't crack the 6 minutes 30 in the 2 kilometre time trial, which I was kind of looking at. I thought he might have done that. He sort of looks like he'd be really good as an 800 metre run, but obviously the 2K time trial, just a little bit too far for Beau Allen to really crack that time. So it didn't fit into that hybrid profile, but definitely has the speed elements and the explosiveness there that we can see from the agility, the sprint, and the standing vertical, where he's got that kind of power into his game. So you've got Smiley and Langford there, who are a little bit slower. Langford the slowest, but ran the best time trial. You've got kind of Smiley in the middle, where he didn't have a great time trial or a great sprint. And then you've got Beau Allen, who's that more explosive, pacier guy that didn't have the greatest time trial. So interesting to compare and contrast and where you actually put all of those mids at the end of the day. I'll move on to the kind of small forwards running defenders. I'm just going to put them all in together so we don't have to go through too many. Jasper Alger, he really impressed me, and I think he's going to be a big needle mover draft-wise. He ran a 2.93 20-metre sprint. He ran a sub 6 minutes 30 2K time trial. So fitting into that hybrid profile, we know he's a pretty good aerial player from what he's shown at National Champs and Coates League. We know he's crafty around goal. He's really dangerous when the ball hits the ground inside forward 50. So I think those numbers are really going to back that up for recruiters, and he's going to be an interesting prospect in this draft. The next one in the small forward group was Malachi Champion. And again, we contrast these two guys. I talked about it in my small forwards video that Jasper Alger was more of the guy that gets up the ground, and Malachi Champion was a stay at home, more of a goal sneak type, and the combine numbers really back that up as well. I go back to Friday, so I watched Malachi do his 2 kilometre time trial. He was pretty upset. He was pretty dejected after that. I don't have the time, but I think it was 7 minutes plus. He wasn't too happy with it. We go to the Sunday 2 days later, and he dominates the combine. A 2.93 second 20-metre sprint, 6th overall. His agility test was 7.8 seconds. So while he can't run and get up the ground, when the ball goes inside 50 close to goal, he's going to pounce on that. He's got the agility to be able to turn a player. We know his goal sense. We know that he's really crafty and he has beautiful foot skills around goal. So I don't think the time trial really matters too much for Malachi, and I think West Coast will get their man as an NGA. Another bit of a needle mover, not someone that we've talked about too much in the draft. Will Hayes really impressed me with that. Getting close to a hybrid profile, but just his endurance really stood out and his agility really stood out, which probably compares him to someone like a Darcy Jones of other years. A 6.13 2 kilometre time trial, which was really elite. Then he went 3.03 for the 20 metre sprint. Not amazing, but still reasonably quick. And then he was the third player in the agility test. So as a high half forward winger type, I think he's one that maybe comes into draft contention off the back of his combine. Toby Travalia as a running defender. We'll kind of move into a couple of these to have a look. I've also got Angus Clark from South Australia, a similar player, pushing 190 centimetres, but have that more of a running game to them, similar to a Will Day, both of these guys. So Toby Travalia, his 20-metre sprint, pretty underwhelming, went 3.18 seconds in that. But his 2K time trial was really good, 6 minutes and 13 seconds for that. So again, we look at those profiles, and Toby Travalia, definitely the endurance profile. He looks quicker than 3.18 for the 20-metre sprint when you actually watch him play football, but obviously he has that endurance ability. I've mentioned before a number of times, he looks a little bit like a track athlete, like a longer distance track athlete. Angus Clark put up similar numbers. It was a 6 minute 13 2-kilometre time trial, and I think he had a better 20-metre sprint than Toby Travalia, but didn't get on the podium or anything like that. So pretty similar players there. They both play off halfback and quite fancied, obviously, coming into this draft. So those were two halfbacks, similar type athletes just to compare. And then I'll go into the key position players, starting with some of the defenders. So the first one is Alex Tyrou, who's really rocketed up draft boards in the back half of the year. He pulled off a brilliant 3-second flat 20-metre sprint. He ran first in the running vertical jump at 94 centimetres. So that elasticity and kind of way that he attacks the football and flies at balls in the air really stood up here in the combine eye test, matching the actual athlete. And we've seen this guy play everywhere on the football field now. We've seen him play forward and do really well. We've seen him play behind the ball and do well. And we've even seen him play pretty well and accumulate the football in the midfield. So I think for Tyrou, he was looking like a top 10 pick anyway. And I think this combine just reiterates how good an athlete and how good a footballer he is. James Barrett really impressed me. He's one that I've sort of compared to Alex Tyrou. He's not as highly fancied and certainly was inferior when we talk about the two key defenders, those intercept marking type defenders. He was inferior to Tyrou in the combine, but he ran a 3.03 20-metre sprint, so he wasn't too far off Tyrou there. And he did actually have a really good agility test, and he had pretty good numbers in the vertical jumping. He didn't make top 10s in anything, but just watching him throughout the day and just picking a few things up, he actually tested really, really well, and recruiters were impressed. Adrian Cole, we need to have a conversation about. So St Kilda fans, have a listen up here. He's an NGA product for you guys. I think the big knock around him has been the ball use, but we can kind of guarantee, I guess we have some insurance now. Some of those athletic traits that have been talked about really are there. He ran a 6 minute and 24 second time trial, which was really, really strong. And then he ran a 3.1 second 20-metre sprint. So he has some of that, closing speed that defenders need, plus running a pretty solid time trial. Kind of shows that people talk about his work rate a lot, and that's sort of there with his endurance. So he's going to be one that's really on the precipice, I think, coming into the November draft. We'll skip on to key position forwards, and the big talking point on the day was Gabriel Stumpf. He blew the roof off the joint at Melbourne Sports and Aquatic. The 196 centimetre key position forward who was really coming hard in the back end of the year, but I think he was, genuinely, he was probably a speculative to late sort of draft pick, and this could really move the needle for him. He ran a 2.81 second 20-metre sprint, which is the 5th best ever recorded, which is unbelievable. And he also was the first in the standing vertical jump. So if that's not a needle mover, I don't really know what is. We'll talk about the other forwards. So the three that were on the board that were testing quite well, you had Cale Guerin, Harry Armstrong, and Tom Sims. Now, interestingly, that they all tested in the top 10. Cale Guerin 6th, Harry Armstrong 7th, and Tom Sims 9 for the agility test. So that's interesting. And the one thing that kind of just caught my eye there was the fact that Job Shanahan wasn't in that group. So he didn't make the top 10. I don't know what his agility test was in the end, but just one to, note out. Now, those forwards like Guerin, Armstrong, and Sims, they didn't make the top 10 for any sprinting, any running, any of the vertical jumping, and nor did Shanahan. So that's kind of all the numbers that we have on them. The one that did, though, and again, fits into that more speculative forward, one that hasn't probably put down the big goal numbers of some of these other guys, is Charlie Nichols. and probably more of a smoky, but he was top 10 for the 20-metre sprint. And I think, again, similar to Gabriel Stumpf, clubs will like the fact that he has that speed to be able to break away from the defender. So interesting takeaways there with the top 10, the top forwards in the draft and just some of the more speculative ones. We know that later in the draft, clubs do tend to take key position players, so that'll be an interesting watch. I talked about needle movers kind of throughout, so I'll just go over the ones that I think could actually, majorly change their draft positions through this. I think Gabe Stumpf, who's that powerful forward we talked about. I think Jasper Alger just looks a lot better after this combine with that endurance and the speed that we've seen, and the agility as well. I think Will Hayes as a sort of winger, half forward, with the agility test that he put in, that mix of a 6-minute 16 2K time trial and the 3:03 20-metre sprint, I think that's really nice as a high half forward type. And then you've got Luke Urquhart. And I think clubs will look at Luke Urquhart and think we can make something out of him, even though the kicking isn't maybe, to the top level with that 2.97 20-metre sprint and the 6:25 2-kilometre. So that is a wrap of all of the numbers throughout the combine that really sort of caught my eye and I thought were, noteworthy of speaking about. I tried to give a little bit of context there just so you can kind of see what similar type players were kind of getting against each other and if there are any kind of anomalies or interesting points to point out there. I think now with those combine numbers in, that's sort of the entire picture done now. So when we talk about rankings and we talk about mock drafts, kind of everything's gone into I use that call often throughout the season, like a lot of things to go under the bridge. I think that's kind of closing that door now. You've sort of got the athletic testing out of the way, you've got the game performances, and it's all about just working out in the moment, gun to the head, who you want to take with the picks, and that's really, really exciting. That is a wrap for this video. I absolutely loved my time at the Combine, and I can't wait to put out some more draft content. As I said, I'm making that podcast video with Jay Edmonds, who is he's worked with George Wardlaw, some of the top players. So keep an eye out for that one. We'll be kind of like honing in on some of the details of the Combine and, some of the things clubs are looking for as well and what he thinks you can sort of develop. So that'll be really interesting too. I think that's a wrap, guys, and I'll see you next time.